Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dear sisters and brothers, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. We can meet again on the next chapter of your applied macroeconomics. And here we try to learn about the government debts. So in this chapter, you will learn about the size of US government debts and how it compares to that of other countries. So problem measuring the budget deficit, traditional and Ricardian views of the government debts, and other perspective of the debt. Next one, we go to here. So here's some pictures that shows indebtedness of the world governments. So this data is quite obsolete, but you can see that majority of the countries on this table show quite high portions of debt compared to the percentage of the GDP. Yeah. So for example, Japan here has 119. So it means that the debt of the government always twice of its GDP size. So for your information, that the limit of the tolerated debt percentage of the GDP is only 60%. So for the countries that has a proportion above 60%, so it means that the indebtedness is quite dangerous. Yeah. And here is the U.S. government debt GDP ratio that increasingly increased year by year, and the trend is positive in terms of the GDP debt ratio. So here the U.S. experience in recent years. Why the U.S. has high level of debt, and here we have the debt GDP ratio increase due to the Reagan tax cuts. So because of the tax received by the government decrease, so increase in demand, spending, and entitlements. And the 90s to 2000s, so the debt decreased due to rapid growth, stock market boom, and tax hikes. Yeah. And 2001, return of deficit due to books tax cut and economic slowdown. So from here, you see that the debt of the government happens due to the slow of the tax received compared to the income. It might happen due to the slowing down of the economic activities, and there is no any return in terms of the investment. And here is the fiscal future. If you look at the fiscal behavior of the government, yeah, it seems to be maybe as not as perspective, yeah, because of some factors happens due to the aging population, for example, yeah. So lower birth rates, increased life expectancy, and retirement of baby boomers, yeah. So for this respective reasons, it happens because of the productivity of the people as not as high as before. Yeah, the people tends to be early retired, and they have long life expectancy. So it seems to be a burden in fiscal budget deficit. Then, yeah. The next one here. And here is the history of the Congressional Budget Office projections, yeah, uh, that the number of people receiving Social Security, Medicare is growing faster than the number working, paying taxes. So in the future, U.S. Projected that the numbers of the fiscal deficit is going to be higher due to the number of the people of receiving medical benefits and the number of working people is going down. And here's the numbers, the projections, yeah, whereby it seems to be increased. And the problem measuring the deficit here, because of the inflations, the inflation happens, yeah, capital assets deflations, uncounted liabilities, and business cycles. Yeah. So those four things make the deficit is widened or broadened in the context of the countries. Here are the example. To see why inflation is a problem, suppose the real debt is constant, which implies a zero real deficit. In this case, the nominal debt growth at the rate of inflation. Yeah. So you see here that um, the real number of debt actually does not change, but the nominal number following the inflation rate. So from here you can see from the simple formula the growing of the debt delta D over D following the inflations. The more inflation, the more nominal growth debt will be. Yeah. And next one here, correcting the deficit for inflation can make a huge difference, especially when inflation is high. Examples: nominal deficit is 28 millions, yeah, and inflation is 8.6%, and the debt here 495 billions. So um, the inflation time debts is 43 billion. So real deficit is the real deficit here is 28 over 43. Yeah. So so you have 15 billion surplus. Yeah. The difference, yeah, the additional debt here due to the inflations. Yeah. And second one here, we go to the capital assets. Yeah. Deficit actually is the change in debt. Yeah. Change in debt. So better capital budgeting, yeah, deficit change in debt minus change in assets. So you compare between the change in debt and change in assets. Suppose government sells an office building and uses the proceeds to pay down the debt. So under the current system, deficit would fall, and the capital budgeting deficit unchanged because fall in debt is offset by the fall in assets. Yeah. So the perspective here is not just in terms of the numbers, but in terms of the change in debt and change in asset. So you change your debt because the change in asset, you reduce your asset in order to pay off your debt. Problem with capital budgeting, the meaning which government expenditures count as capital expenditures. Yeah. So the government must select which one the asset that must be sold in order to offset the debt. So the 3-1 is the unaccounted liabilities. You see, the current measure of deficit current measure of deficit omits important liabilities to the governments. So future pension payment owed to current government workers, yeah, future social security payments and contingent liabilities, too hard to attach dollar value when the outcome is uncertain. So it means that uncounted liabilities means that the future probability of the payment taken by the government due to the activity by the citizens. For example, is the pension fund, yeah, and the social security. So those things will be the future expenditure for the government that must be taken off. And the fourth one is the business cycles. Yeah, the deficit varies over the business cycles due to automatic stabilizers, unemployment insurance, income tax system. So the business cycle here is very important in order to determine to what extent the value of the debt will be increased or decreased. These are not measurement errors, but do make it harder to judge fiscal policy stance. Is an observed increase in deficit due to downturn of expansionary shift in fiscal policy. Yeah. So we look at the policy response then in looking at the business cycle movement. And the solution cyclically adjusted budget deficit um, based on estimates of what government spending and revenue should be if the country were in the natural rate of output and employment. Yeah, you see that what the response of the government if the cyclical business cycle happens. Yeah. Next one here is you must exercise care when interpreting the reported deficit figures. Yeah. Is the government debt really a problem? Yeah. So the problem is the equation is the government debt really problems? There are two viewpoints: traditional views and Ricardian views. Yeah. And the traditional views of a tax cut and corresponding increase in government debts. So in the short run, the income will increase and the unemployment is decreased. Long run, Y and U back to the natural rates. Closed economy, yeah, interest rate will hike and inflation will down. In an open economy, the real exchange rate increase and the deficit, yeah, the trade deficit is lower, yeah, because the real exchange rate increase, so the export is more compared to import. Very long run, slower growth until the economy reach new steady state with lower income per capita. Yeah. So in the long run, the economy will be slower, and because it has reached the new steady state economy. Yeah. So in here, in traditional views, the government debt here will make positive things, yeah, in the short run and in the long run as well, and very long run. Yeah. In the Ricardian views, according to Ricardian equivalence, a debt finance tax cut has no effect on consumption, national saving, and real interest rate, investment, net export, or real GDP, even in short run. So the Ricardian view negatively look at the impact of the debt into economy. Yeah. And here we can see that the logic of Ricardian equivalence. Yeah. Consumers are forward-looking. Yeah. Know that a debt finance card today implies an increase in the future taxes that's equal in present value to the tax card. So the consumer here is diligent, clever, yeah, clever. So they can predict that the future of the future impact of tax cut will be equal to what the tax cut happened today. Thus, the tax cut doesn't make consumers better off, so they don't raise consumptions. So there's no any uh, behavioral change in terms of the debt conducted, and they save the full tax cut in order to repay the future tax liability. So suggest the consumers conducted the anticipated activities. And the result, private saving rises by the amount, public saving falls, leaving national saving unchanged. Yeah. And problem with Ricardian equivalence is myopia. Not all consumers think that far ahead, so they see the cut tax as a windfall. Yeah. Borrowing constraints, some consumers are not able to borrow enough to achieve the optimal consumptions and would therefore spend a tax card. Yeah. And future generation, if consumers expect that the burden of repaying a tax card will fall on future generation, then a tax card not make them feel better off, so they increase spending. So here is the some leaders of US that against the Cardian equivalence. Yeah. On here, yeah. Um, and now we look at the other perspective of government balance. Yeah. So from here, you can see that we have to conduct a balanced budget. Yeah, the balanced budget and optimal fiscal policy. What does it mean? Yeah. Some politicians have proposed amending the US constitutions to require balanced the federal government budget every year. So many economists reject this proposal, arguing that the deficit should be used to stabilize output and employment. Smooth taxes in the face of fluctuating income and redistribute income across generation when appropriate. Yeah. So here on this regard, the government must achieve a balanced budget and and backed by the optimal fiscal policy. Optimal means the best policy that can promote the balanced budget policies. Yeah. So we have to find out what's its balanced budget. We have to determine the threshold to what extent the budget can be defined as a balance. And here the fiscal effect on monetary policy. The government deficit may be financed by printing money. A high government debt may be an incentive for the policymakers to create inflations, to reduce real value of the debt at the expense of bondholders. Fortunately, little evidence that the link between fiscal and monetary policy is important. Most governments know the folly of creating inflation. Most central banks have at least some political independence from fiscal policymakers. Therefore, the central bank has independent policy because if that's not independent, so the deficit can be financed by the printing money. Yeah. The debt and politics, some do not trust policymakers with deficit spending. They argue that policymakers would worry about the true cost of state spending, since the burden falls on the few taxpayers. Future taxpayers cannot participate in the decision process, so their interests may be not taken into account. These are the reasons to the proposal for the balanced budget amendment discussed above. Yeah. So the politics is quite important in determining to what extent the debt will be taken by the governments. And international dimensions, government debt deficit can lead to trade deficit. It must be financed by borrowing from abroad. Yeah. Large government debt may increase the risk of a capital flights, as foreign investors may perceive a greater risk of default. Large debt may reduce a country's may reduce the political clout in international affairs. Yeah. The summary, the relative to GDP US government debt is moderate compared to other countries. So standard figures on the deficit are imperfect measures on fiscal policy because they are not corrected for inflations, do not account for changes in government asset, omit some liabilities, do not account for effect of business cycles. So we have to take care of these some factors that can influence the numbers of deficits. And international views, the debt finance tax cut increased consumption and reduced national saving. In a closed economy, this led to higher interest rate, lower investment, and lower long-run standard of living. In open economy, it causes exchange rate appreciation, or fall in net export, or increase in trade deficit. The traditional view holds the debt finance tax cut do not affect consumption or national saving, and therefore do not affect interest rate, investment, and net export. And most economies would strict balanced budget rule, as it would hinder the use of fiscal policy to stabilize output, smooth taxes, or distribute the burden tax across generations. And government debt can have other effects, so inflations, political clout, yeah, and others. So I think that's all the systems about this overview of government debt. So in conclusion is the debt is dangerous for an economy if it is not managed well. Therefore, the decision to have a budget deficit and lead to the debt decision must be analyzed to the balanced policy, and then balanced by the ability of the government to optimal fiscal policy. So the optimal fiscal policy actually is important in order to ensure that the balanced budget deficit is maintained. I think that's all for a while. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.